Of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to Product Lessons, a podcast channel where we talk to product leaders from all over the world and learn from them how they build world class software products. Before I introduce my guest today, I want to let you all know that this podcast is in four channels. A video is on YouTube. If you want audio only, then you can watch it on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Tunes. The links are mentioned below in the description here. Also, if you like these conversations, do consider hitting subscribe. I have some really cool guests coming up, including Marty Kagan next month for the second time. Also, hit me on Twitter. It's Product Lessons. I engage more there than any other social media platform. So, with that, let me introduce my guest today. He is the Prashant Agrawal. He's a product manager at Postman. And Postman, if you are a product manager, then there's no way you haven't heard of it. It's an API platform for building and using APIs. It has become a de facto platform all over the world for API uh, programmers. More than 500,000 companies use Postman, including 98% of Fortune 500. And I'm so delighted that it is a startup that was conceived and built in India. They recently closed a Series D funding of $225 million at $5.6 billion valuation. So, with that, let's welcome Prashant. Prashant, welcome to Product Lessons Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Ravi. Thanks for a warm welcome. Pleasure to be here.
So Prashant, you are an avid blogger, and that's how I found you. Um, in fact, that's how I find all my guests. So if I look for a topic, I Google for a topic, and I see people writing blogs about it, and that's how I approach them. And that's exactly how I did. So have you been blogging for a while now?
Uh, I don't blog actively. What I generally do is when I'm thinking about like a particular topic for a while. So there are these thoughts that develop in your mind, right? And what I like to do is share that with like a broader audience so that I could learn from their experiences as well. And that's why I think like most of my blogs, what I've written around APIs, around product management, that's how those come into like real world. And that's my process.
That's amazing. Even for me, when I write something, it clarifies my thinking. I get feedback. So it's a virtuous loop. It has multiple. It's a high leverage activity, multiple advantages once
Yep.
you engage in. And I think most of my clarity comes when I write it, put it down, put my thoughts down on paper. So, Prashant, before we begin talking about API first company and get into meatier details, I'm very, very curious and amazed about the success story of Postman. Um, so I just wanted to know from you, you work with Postman. What do you think, according to you, is the reason behind stupendous success of a Postman from India?
Got it. Got it. Very interesting question, Ravi. I think like every successful product or company, the reason behind their success has to be like two particular points, right? The first one is being at the right place at the right time, right? So I think Postman came into existence when this API ecosystem was starting to boom up. Like, we were seeing a lot of API first organizations, companies who were building this API economy where they were creating businesses around APIs. And what we saw there at that point of time was that a lot of companies have started relying on APIs, microservices, and they were starting to realize the pain points while working with the APIs. And the existence of Postman came when our co-founder Abhinav also started facing those issues, like when you're trying to get a response of a particular endpoint, and there was like the earlier solution was to use curl, and it was like a very tedious process to get an API to work to. And that's how like Postman
So
came
what
into
was curl?
existence.
Was it an IDE? So curl is a is
So sure. So curl is like a command line tool, right?
okay.
Which using which you can uh, send a request, get a response, view the response. But it's very tedious in a way that you would have to craft that entire command through like manually, and you can't reuse it until you are saving it in your notepad or somewhere else. And it was like the workflow was like very tedious for developers. right? And even if you, let's say you are doing like complex API requests, which is like you are using post requests, creating bodies, right? That all thing become very tedious when you are trying to do it within like a small command line interface. So what we realized that if we provide like a GUI to this sort of problem, it could just improve the developer productivity by 10x. And that's how like the Postman's initial product came into picture, which is use Postman's UI to send the request, get the response, and over time we build on top of it from users' feedback, which is I think is the second most important reason behind Postman's success. That we have been very much uh, involved with the developer community. We are like active feedback listeners about what our developers have to say, what the problems they face, and over the time we get gathered all the feedback from the companies that are in this API first economy, and started building this API platform. We started from API tool and we moved towards like an API platform. Postman at this point of instance takes care of your entire API lifecycle, which is we cover every aspect of an API from designing, developing, testing, documenting, and even monitoring those APIs.
Got it. And while I was reading through your Postman's, so one of your blog posts talks about the flywheel. I just wanted to share this here.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so this is the flywheel that I found on your company blog post, and let's go through it. So flywheel is anything that is a virtuous loop. By the virtue of more people using it, it becomes even more valuable, and that's how the value just
Yep.
keeps the value loops keeps growing. Um, so 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 this is how the flywheel works. So developers use Postman to run, test, and master APIs. Developers then like it because of the experience, and then they advocate for Postman to be used at work. And then development teams use Postman to build and maintain internal APIs. Teams encourage cross-functional development and collaboration via Postman. Companies create and share public APIs through Postman. So developers, because they are creating and sharing public APIs through Postman, other developers discover these APIs through Postman, and that's how they again create these. They
Yep.
start using Postman. So it's a virtuous cycle and a flywheel, isn't it?
Absolutely. So this is like a very powerful growth loop in Postman success as well, right? As more and more API publishers come onto Postman and publish their APIs, it helps us acquire more and more users because, for example, let's someone like, for example, Notion launched their Postman, their API on Postman, right? And it immediately acquired all the users who were waiting for Notion API for a while to work with the Notion tool, right? And as soon as like as many new products come and publish their APIs onto Postman's platform, you would see like we are able to acquire more and more users because, like you said correctly in the beginning, like Postman has become some sort of like de facto tool when it comes to API. We have been able to create habit around Postman. Like whenever you think about testing or working with an API, the first tool that comes into your mind generally is like Postman. So, and what we are offering all our publishers is to use this habit loop that Postman has created among our developers to onboard new developers and improve their time to request.
Got it. So you are a product manager at Postman. What part of Postman are you responsible for?
Got it, got it. So I started as product manager with respect to like the onboarding initiatives within Postman, but now I have moved under the growth team. So I work as growth product manager, working on the growth aspects of Postman. Like how do we grow Postman as a tool, as a platform? What more we could do so that we could offer more value to our users? And so that's what my focus area is. How do we make developers or users successful within Postman?
Got it. So you look at so onboarding is also growth, right?
Correct.
Because if somebody comes in, you just want to retain them, give them time to value should be as less as possible and stuff like that, right? So
Absolutely.
excellent. Great. So with that, so I mean, the audience that is listening to us would have some sense of APIs if they're listening to this. But let's set the context again. So I mean, what
Sure.
are APIs basically, and then we can get into code first versus API first topic.
Got it. Got it. So Ravi, like API at its very basic level, right, is like a software intermediary that allows two applications to talk to each other and share data between them, right? You can imagine it to be like a digital glue that binds different systems together, right? For example, if you're using Facebook or Google or any type of application, whether on web or mobile phone, you are interacting with an API in some manner, right? So basically, if you think about API, APIs are the core and soul of the modern application that exists out there.
Got it. Yeah. So, and also, I have increasingly seeing this trend towards not building UI based uh, point solutions, because increasingly what is happening because of the prominence of point solutions at a very specialized level. There is for any organization, an average organization is going to buy at least uh, 3 to 4 dozen applications. All right. And in this world, it's very difficult to get another application and let their let the employees use that application. So as a result,
Absolutely.
there is this growing trend of using applications within their own systems, not as a new application, but as an integration within the existing system. And that's why product managers, I see this trend that they are now moving away into building UI based applications and offering APIs into the integrations of their potential customers. And that's where the growth of API first is taking prominence. So, with that context, I just wanted to know, um, so why are organizations moving towards API first approach, and what does API first approach mean? Maybe that would be a good context.
Got it. Got it. True. So, if you like you correctly mentioned here, right, Ravi? For example, we are seeing many organizations now wants to become and leverage integrations as a strategy to retain and get more users, right? And the reason for that is like very simple if you understand it from this perspective, right? Like you need to build certain habits around your product if you want to retain users, right? And it becomes very tough for someone to for you to get every time get a user onto your platform each and every day, right? Because first of all, they are not used to your application or platform. They don't know how to use your application and platform in a way that they could reuse it on regular basis. You have to develop those habits, right? But on the other way, if you're integrating with one of their existing product that they use on day-to-day basis, you are immediately leveraging the knowledge that they already have to use your own product, right? For example, if you integrate with Slack, everyone knows how to use Slack. And once you have built an integration with Slack, it gives you immense value where users are using your product through an interface which they are well aware of. And that's why we are seeing like similar to Slack, there are like several products out there, and companies want to leverage those channels as acquisition strategies where they are offering those integrations to acquire customers and build those habits around it. Right. Now, talking specifically about like why organizations are moving towards API first, right? So I think the major reason, like we need to get some background context on why we are seeing this shift happening. So product or software development in general has changed a lot in last couple of decades, I would say, right? Today, like we said, like no one just want to use product independently or in silos. Users today have become like much more demanding in terms of what they want out of software. They want integrations, they want customizability, they want extensibility, and like and whatnot. So soon companies started realizing that catering to all those requests, like building UI features within the products, is like a very challenging job, and they need to find like a better way to do it. So what they started doing, they started creating APIs to expose those functionalities and features. But then, because these APIs were an afterthought of the product, they were not at par with what their actual product used to offer, right? And there were always certain security flaws or design flaws within the API that was making it too painful for developers to onboard on those APIs, right? And once and because of this, right, like, and every time like developer wanted like a new feature, they would put in like a new request to the PM or the organizations, and they would have to release like a new API version, or like make it somehow compatible with like the previous version, which is in another sense a nightmare for API publishers to do, because imagine maintaining 10 different versions of API simultaneously, right? And make sure that all of them work correctly. So it's a pain. Now, when so I think like the shift started happening when the organizations started realizing that they need like a different approach towards this API problem, right? Like how do we make more developer friendly APIs? In fact, I would say like the first person or one of the initial persons who said this change was, I would say, Jeff Bezos.
Yes.
So Jeff Bezos, interestingly, in 2002, sent out like an email to all its employees saying that it's required for you to expose functionality of your software or the application that you're working through APIs, right? The only way of communicating within teams have to be API. No shared models, no inter-process communication, nothing. You would have to expose APIs, and if you don't do that, you will be fired. So this was, I
So
think, like a very
what
strong
must have been
message.
what must have been going through his mind when he sent out that memo, very popular memo? So was that internal efficiency of how teams work with each other, or was there a bigger purpose? Because I don't think at that time he knew that he is going to be building AWS, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So generally, Ravi, like all these things, right? They come out of the challenges that you are facing internally within organizations. So just to give you an insight, right? Like Postman itself went through like various transitions in how they want to structure their teams within Postman, just with an objective of becoming more agile, more productive, and shipping out more stuff. And similarly, during 2002, when Amazon was working on their products, they started realizing that there is like a lot of friction that is coming in within the product teams, right? Every time you would have to build a new feature, you would have to collaborate with 10 different teams just to ship out one small feature. And that was leading to like a long time to market, which was like a problem for Amazon because internet was also booming at that particular time. So you want to reach to market at a faster rate than your competitors. And along with that, I think what Amazon also witnessed was these the upcoming API transformations, for example, like Salesforce, eBay, all these was like coming up during that particular period itself, right? So I think both of these two as a combination triggered, I would say, this API mandate,
Got it. And
right?
then, so you said that even at Postman, the teams expose each other through abstractions, and that's how they communicate. Is that how it is?
Yeah, that's what we try to aim to, right? It's obviously tough, like you have to have like a very solid API first strategy, and we always improvise on top of that. For example, your API first strategy cannot remain constant if you are like a 20% team versus like a 2,000 member team. It also has to evolve with the size and the stage of that your organization is in, and that's what we are also doing. So when we were so I joined Postal and I was, I think, the 20th person to join the company. We had completely different API strategy. But now when we are today, we have about, I think, 450 people across multiple continents. We need like a different API strategy. We need teams to be more agile. We need teams to be less dependent on each other so that we could ship those features out, ship those improvements out at a much faster pace. Right.
But should it, because I'm not a developer, but it seems like intuitive, and should it not be a common practice to abstract your code base from one team from another so that they can easily communicate with each other? What was the challenge and difficulty, and why it is often an afterthought?
Got it. So I think generally, like if you are not very thoughtful about what your business is going to be, right? Generally, what you do is like you see the first problem, you started building product around that particular problem, and you never think, look, like I will break this product down into five different systems, which each system doing their own things. What you generally want to do is like, okay, I have to solve this problem. Let's put up a database, integrate my application with that database, and that's it. Then you started thinking about, oh, I need to authenticate users, right? Now, how do I do that? Do I create like a separate service for that, or do I integrate with what I have currently? Then you would have to start scaling it, because the scale at which maybe your product operates would be very different from the scale at which your identity service has to work, right? And as soon as you start scaling, you would start seeing those patterns. Okay, like the scaling has to be different, the management has to be different. Like you need to put like more emphasis on security and governance when you're working on an identity management system versus like any other service, for example a content management service, right? So it's very tough, and I would say not recommended that you go in that distributed system in very early stages of your company, because in that case you haven't found a product market fit, you haven't shipped or got any product validation, and you are just putting all this effort from like engineering perspective, right? In our terms, what we call it, like over engineering a solution at that particular point.
Yes. So
So
is
that's
there a
what it is.
trade-off? Is there a sweet spot where you can say you are not over engineering? So, so are you saying that only when you start hitting that product market fit, where you see a bigger potential, should you then invest in thinking of restructuring your teams according to APIs? Is that how it is?
So what I'm saying is that you should always think like within like very early stages, right? You should always think in terms of APIs, because see, if you have APIs, you can change the behind the scenes or the foundations at any point of time, but your interfaces remain the same, right? For example, if you have not thought through about your interfaces, and then when you are doing these transitions towards different stages, it would be very painful, because how would you migrate your old users, right? Obviously there are strategies for that, but it is like a painful job. So what we are saying, what like we generally recommend, is that you start emphasizing on APIs from an early stage, and as you scale, as you bring in more systems to your let's say product or your to software, you then started dissociating those APIs into separate teams and give them like separate responsibilities. So as your system evolve, you evolve them, and you start dissociating those into like different services.
So are you saying there's no downside of starting API first?
There
So
is no downside. Yeah.
even if it doesn't grow beyond a point, it doesn't grow into a complicated say, product offering like Amazon. Amazon was huge, and it now it seems common sense that yes, with that such huge infrastructure, they could not have survived without abstraction and without APIs. But a smaller organization, so there is only upside if you are starting with API first mentality. So it's not like only when you get complicated that's when APIs help. APIs can be helpful even at the very initial level of your organization. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what I would say is that if you are clear in your business strategy and your business vision, like the goals of the business, you can develop an API first strategy from the very beginning. For example, even if you're not even clear about like what your business is supposed to do, what your product is supposed to do, no matter how well you design your API, it's gonna fail at certain points. Because at that point, maybe you would do a pivot, or maybe you would do things that your business was not supposed to do, right? So for example, like Stripe was very clear that they want to do payments, right? And that's why the entire business outcome was like, okay, we would create like an API that would make payments like a seamless job. You think about Plaid, you would think, okay, we'll simplify the business infrastructure, like the bank infrastructure, in a way that would give easy access for banks to spawn up. So I think API first strategy has to tie up with like what your business strategy is, right? You can't say that, okay, I'm going to just create like an API first strategy and it will work out. That's tough to assume, right? Because if your business pivot or you do like change as you grow within your products or within your business, it's going to be tough to keep up with that API first strategy. So if you're clear in your business vision and business strategy, you can definitely go ahead with like API first approach.
All right. So now you're talking about business strategy. That means now you're talking about exposing your APIs into public, right? So there is internal communication within the teams on how should they communicate in terms of okay their code base, abstracting it and only communicating with APIs. And then there is this business case wherein you want to expose the APIs in public to your customers so that they can use them in their own integration. So there is a
Correct.
split between these two, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
when you say API first, it includes both these strategies.
And that's the beauty of API first, right, Ravi? For example, uh, if you're building your product on top of like your core APIs, right, you can offer those similar APIs with some sort of constraint to your public users, to your partners, right? But it's essentially the same API, right? If let's say you're not doing an API first approach, that means at that point of time your developers or you have to do like extra effort where you would have to maintain internal APIs separately from what you're offering to public or what you're offering to like your end users, right? So with API first, what you could do is you could use the same infrastructure and similar APIs for to achieve all your use cases. In that case, API just becomes another channel of getting more users. Hey, this is our product. If you want to, if you're into UI, but if you want to create integrations, you want to integrate our product within your infrastructure or what you are doing, we also have like similar APIs which offer exactly similar features, right? And that's what API first strategy allows you to do.
Got it. So, so what are the characteristics then for an API first company? How does it look like?
Got it. Got it. So, I mean, and there could be like different schools of thoughts here, right? But how I personally think about like what an API first company should be and what are its characteristics, I feel like API first companies generally have like their business strategy built around APIs, like I mentioned before as well, right? If you are, if like whatever is the outcome that your business is trying to solve, uh, that is built around some sort of like an API, right?
Could
API
you
first
elaborate this?
organization.
Could you elaborate this with an example? Like, what does how do you translate a business strategy into an API strategy?
Sure. So, for example, so before Twilio came into picture, right? Everyone who wanted to reach out to their customers, they were doing their own SMS infrastructure. They were building some sort of way to reach out to users through SMSs, right? And the problem with that, it was not scalable because obviously SMS is not your domain. Your domain, for example, I think Uber faced this particular problem where they had to reach users through SMS and they were trying to build this infrastructure, right? Obviously, you could do that. You could put resources, bandwidth into it. But what you would have to realize is SMS, sending SMS is not your business domain, right? It's someone else's job. You are not the domain experts in that particular thing, right? So, and you don't know what are the right strategies to scale. You don't know why certain SMSs fail to get delivered to certain users, right? And this was like a similar problem that many other organizations were also facing. So Twilio came into picture, who said that, hey, we are going to solve your SMS problem, right? All you have to do is use this endpoint, send us the content that you want to send to the user, and we'll take care rest of everything. We'll make sure that it's delivered to the users. We'll make sure that there are categories. We'll make sure that it's compliant across continents and across countries, and we'll take all the headache from you. So it was a business strategy that we will solve like your SMS sending problem. And then they built an API around it to make it an easy for everyone and anyone to integrate. Similarly, the case of Stripe, right? If let's say you were Stripe didn't exist, right? And if you were trying to do checkout in your product, you would have to take care how to accept different credit cards. You would have to make sure that they are secured, they are stored very securely, right? You would have to make sure that you are doing tax calculations correctly, right? You are sending you are sending billing emails, all those things correctly to all those users, right? And then, in some sense, you are measuring the revenue that you are generating. So there's like an entire domain related to checkouts and payments, right?
Right.
Obviously you could go ahead and do that, no one is stopping you to do that, but is it your domain? Is it where you should be focusing as an organization your resources and your bandwidth? Probably not. You should try to focus on your core business domains, core expertise for which you have went out and started this organization, and let all these things be taken care of by the organizations who have expertise in that. And that's why Stripe came in. They say, don't worry about things, this is our integration, this is our API, use this and you would never have to worry about payments.
Got
So
it.
these kind of companies led to this an API economy where like there were business models being generated on top of APIs, which is Twilio, SendGrid, uh, Stripe, and now you have like a lot in like payments domain, which is like I played. You have PayPal, who's also coming up with like the similar strategies. And so this is what I meant. Like you should have like a your business strategy should be around built around APIs, which is you simplify a like a complex problem which is critical to like a user's business, right? So, for example, payments is like a very complex problem and which is very critical to user's business, and you have built your company around it. You've built APIs around it, right? API first companies spend more time in designing and documenting their APIs rather than implementing it, right? Most of the organizations that you would see, they would what the general process that they would follow is that they implement the API in whatever language they want, and then they say, hey, okay, we created these 4 APIs. Here is the documentation of those 4 APIs. And do you think you like these, or do you have any suggestions, right? So in this case, what organizations do, they have coded the API first, and then they have asked for feedback. Whereas in API first companies, right, it considers API as their product. So what they generally do is say, hey, this is what we are thinking about our API should look like, and we are thinking that these are the use cases that could be solved through this API. Would you like to care and comment on these things? We haven't developed anything, so all your feedback is welcome. Right? So it is taking like a more user-centric or user feedback-driven approach towards generating APIs. And these users could be your public users or could be your internal developers.
Hmm.
Right?
Got it. You
And
mentioned about, yeah, go ahead.
like this is the final point here, I would say is like these all these companies generally have some sort of like a developer portal, which makes it super easy for developers to come to onboard onto the API that they're exposing, right? Maybe have some sort of sandbox which helps them to try out that API as soon as possible.
Right. So you mentioned about not just exposing your API in any programming language, but ensuring that the design that you focus on the design aspect as well. And you have written a blog post also on that API should be designed just as you design point solutions or UX based products as well. Uh, so, do you want to elaborate on that and help us understand what is a good API design that helps you succeed in the marketplace?
Got it. Very interesting question, Ravi. So I think it's been a while I've written that blog, uh, but I'll try to like explain like what was my thought process and how that blog came into existence, right? uh, at that particular point of time, I think we were working on like a new feature within Postman, and we were discussing a lot about APIs, what this API would be, and I was pairing up with like one of my colleagues on this, like, okay, what this API design should look like, right? And what we realized, like, we were kind of having like similar conversation. So I started my career, by the way, as a front-end developer, just to FYI there, right? So what I realized, right, I was having like a similar conversation with this developer that I used to have with like another designer, right? Or the designer used to have with me, that, hey, we have created these mocks. Do you think like this would address these user problems? Right, what are your feedback on these designs? And I was having like similar conversation with this other person where he was saying, hey, I have designed this particular response that you would get from this API. Do you need anything else from this? Does this API response needs to do any other similar kind of thing? And that's what got me thinking, like, if we think about designing in general, right? So the job of design, the design is not what it looks like and what it feels like. Design in its true sense is how things work, right? There's like a very interesting book, Design for like everyday things, right? So I think design is like how things should work, and that's what all design is. So I started thinking and drawing similarities between like UX design and API design, and what I found was like a good API design, right, should follow, I would say, like similar kind of principles what your UX design follows, which is like your API should be useful, like from at least from users' point of view. It should be usable, like very easy to use. Like if you are expecting it to have like a very complex body request structure so that someone could get a response, like it's tough to use that on day-to-day basis. Like your UI should be like very simple to use. Your APIs also should be like very simple to use, right? It should be desirable in the sense, don't offer APIs that are not needed by people or that won't be used by people. Make sure that you understand what the people want from those APIs and you design APIs in that manner, right? Uh, APIs should be findable or discoverable, like your UI. So there is like a very common problem that we discuss in the UI world or the UX world is like, is this discoverable? Is this UI discoverable to our users? Right. And we do strategies around that to make it more discoverable. And you have like similar problems. So for example, if I am working in a company which has like 50 microservices, it becomes tough for a developer to understand what is the right API to use in this particular case. Right. So I think a good API should be discoverable as well.
And how do you do that? Say, so when you say API should be discoverable, you mean to say the endpoint should be discoverable, right?
Uh, I mean, yeah, I mean, the existence of that API should be discoverable, right? For example, if you're in a large organization, how would you know whether, okay, there is an API to achieve this particular job or not? And what is the schema of that API looks like? Like, what is the parameters that this API takes, right? So you need like a central place where you could find all those APIs, find all the documentations related to that API, and you could understand how it works, right? Like what would it take to get that API to work? So that's what I meant by like the API should be findable and discoverable. And the other aspect, like why
If
what I
somebody is
meant,
listening to you, somebody is
sure,
listening to you, and he buys your idea. Yes, I want to make. I mean, so the intention is there. I want to make it discoverable, but what goes into making an API discoverable is my question.
got it, got it. Various companies, Ravi, uses like various strategies, right? For example, certain companies have this shared conference doc where they maintain, okay, this is the documentation URL of this particular API. These are the use cases that are solved by this particular API, right? And these are the persons to whom you should reach out to. This is like another way. If I talk about like in Postman's way, so Postman has something called as like Postman's private API network, which is your internal network of all your APIs, right? Which tells you, okay, these are all your APIs, these are the jobs that these APIs perform, and this is how you could access them. You get like one-click documentation for all those APIs. You get to understand, okay, how to use those APIs. So it's just like a single place in which you could just search about an endpoint and you get, okay, this is the API that I was looking for, right? So maybe you need to create those like either those discovery points within your organization by your own, or you could leverage something like Postman's private API network. The other aspect, what I meant by like findable was, right, is I would say like predictability of that API, right? For example, let's say if you have an endpoint which is slash users that give you all your users, right?
Right.
Then it's expected that slash user slash like a user ID would give you like the one particular user. And if you like
Right.
change that payload, that means understanding that API becomes difficult. So there are like both of these parts to it,
Right.
right? Uh, and the other points are like the API should be accessible, credible, valuable,
Right.
right? So these are like I think like the core objectives what like a good API or good API should solve for. They should
Right.
look to achieve these particular outcomes, right? Now the question again comes like, but how do you design like a good API, right?
Right.
Like what does a good well-designed API looks like?
Right.
And I personally feel, Ravi, that this is like a very subjective question in the sense that how would you define what is like a good UI, right?
So
You
but
define
UIs have some guidelines. Okay, there are some
correct,
heuristic principles. There are some style guides. So does API
absolutely.
have a Bible or a style guide which is the standard and everybody should follow it? Is there something like that happening?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So, for example, right, style guides, if you think about it, right, style, there is no universal style guide, right? It is like you generally have, if your organization, they would have their own design system that this is how a button looks in our product, right? This
Yes.
is how this particular form fields look in our product. So design guidelines have to be established by organizations. And in the similar way, a lot of organizations establish these API design guidelines as well. Like this is how an endpoint should look like. It should be plural, singular. It should use these things in the query parameters. And this is how they outline, okay, this is like what every endpoint should have, right? So what organizations do, they establish these design guidelines by themselves, and they vary like from like use case to use case basis. For example, what should be your error response structure in case there is like a 400 or 404, right? So these are all things that a design guide like you can establish within like a design guideline. Now you would ask like, is there like a template for it to establish those, right? So we have, I think, published a couple of templates in our Postman's API network, which you can import it, you can take inspiration from it, but those are only for like inspiration perspective. There is no design guideline generator that could generate these guidelines for you, because,
Got
like I said, like a lot of API strategy, right, has to be informed from your business strategy,
it. Mm.
right? Like what you are trying to achieve. So I think all different businesses are different, all different API use cases are different. And that's why you would see like different similarities between different API design guidelines as well.
So would you recommend like if it varies from companies to companies depending upon their own internal strategy, then would you recommend like getting together and brainstorming on, this would be our best approach, and let's agree on a guideline on how best we can design our APIs and documenting it and ensuring everybody is sticking to that guideline? Is that Is that the fair approach?
Like within an organization or
Yes,
across organization?
within the entire organization.
Yes, I think that's how like these things should happen, right? Like for example, like another characteristic of an API first company, right, is that everyone aligns with that API first strategy. Everyone has like a buy-in in that API first strategy. You can't say that okay, only these three people are the one who is leading our API first initiative. Rest the entire organization doesn't care about it. This doesn't happen in API first organizations, right? So everyone has a buy-in. Everyone has vested interest within like a good, well-designed API. And that's why what these companies do, they have generally like a API PM who is paired generally with like an API architect or an architect in general, whose sole job is to establish these guidelines, work with technical architecture groups, if you have one, to establish those initial set of guidelines. Okay, this is how our organization's APIs would look like and work like. This is our versioning strategy. This is how we would ensure that these are backward compatible. And these are the scenarios in which we'll make sure that these are not backward compatible and things like that.
Got it. Excellent. Yeah, talking about backward compatibility, why don't we expand a little bit on that? So the thing
Absolutely.
is, APIs are always improving. You have versions coming up, and you update it with changing business requirements. Uh, First of all, how do you evolve these APIs the right way, and then how do you maintain these version controls so that on your customers' end they do not struggle in adopting to this newly evolved APIs that you are providing?
Correct. Absolutely. So one of the challenges of the API first businesses and API first strategy is evolving these things, right? It's easy to evolve in product. You add new feature, you onboard people onto that, right? Um, but with API first strategy, it is a challenge. And the challenge in the sense, for example, you are launching like a new feature. Now the problem comes like, do you update your existing APIs to support that feature, or do you create like a new version for that? And in the same way, like we think about, for example, like incremental features versus like features from you that you build from scratch. This is like a similar analogy, right? So when we think about like changes or evolving APIs, right? There are basically, I would say, two categories of changes, which is compatible changes and incompatible changes. So compatible changes are the ones that could be supported on top of your existing API. For example, imagine that you have like a user's API, right? And you wanted, so for people to make it easy for your users to use that API, you wanted to introduce functionality of, let's say, filtering on top of that. Like based on certain parameters, you could filter the response that you get from this particular user's API, which rather than returning all your users would return a filtered list of users, right? This can be supported on in a compatible manner on your existing API, because maybe you could add this filter through a query parameter or through headers, right? So this is like a compatible change. Other thing is like if you're trying to add an additional property to your API, that hey, I would like to give you this additional information from your API response.
I'm
uh,
there.
oh sorry, yeah, that you would like to give like an additional response from this particular API, right? So these are all compatible changes, right? Now there is another category, and for these changes, sorry, for compatible changes, you don't need to maybe version your API. Like you would need to version your API, but your users would not have to, let's just start you can say significantly change the way that they use the API. They can keep using your previous versions with the construct of, or by they can be assured that the whatever use cases they have, it won't break because you are not doing any breaking change, right? Now in case of incompatible APIs, what you're saying is that we are doing something significantly new in terms of how we work or how our business work, right? And this is impossible to support on top of our existing API in some manner, right? For example, if you're just bringing something entire architecture, for example, I'll tell you in like Postman's construct, right? Postman introduced this construct of workspaces, right, and role-based access control. And for us, it was very, very tough to support those things on top of our existing APIs because our existing APIs were developed without this construct of workspaces. So when we did that, we had to release like a breaking change. But it was ensured that, hey, we will support these two versions for a prolonged period. And But if you want to use like the newer capabilities of a workspace, you would have to migrate on this newer version of the APIs, right? So the thing is, like, if you are building or fundamentally changing something with your business or product, you would have to release like breaking API changes. Now the strategy is like one good recommendation that I generally have for people is that make sure that there is like a deprecation strategy for your APIs. You can't say that we will keep supporting the last 10 major versions of our API. That's very tough to maintain. And you think if you're from developer perspective, right? You have 10 different business logics catering to achieve the similar outcome in some manner, right? That means you're never removing your code depths. You are building on those code depths, and you're just including new if blocks, making sure that okay, API version is this, do this particular thing. So generally, it's a good practice that you support last 2 to 3 API versions. I mean, all open source softwares, everyone who releases their product in terms of versions do this kind of practice, right? For example, Node has a defined timeline. Okay, this is like long-term support this is LTS, this is going to be supported for this much time, or this is only security updates is going to be applied for this particular versions. So when you are doing incompatible changes and releasing incompatible changes, make sure there is like a deprecation strategy for your older versions. And the second part is migration path. Like someone who is using your existing API and you want them to migrate to like a newer version of the API, what is the migration path for such users? It should be well documented, and you should have be empathic towards your users, because it's like an additional work that you're giving them, that hey, we are releasing this new feature, but this leads to this additional work on your end, right?
Right.
So, so I think these are the strategies that you would have to follow generally. Now from consumers perspective, right, so what we talked about is from producer perspective, that this is how you would release changes. But as an API consumer, how do you make sure that any change that someone is releasing or an API publisher is releasing is not breaking my use case, right?
Right.
Because in certain scenarios, like we see, APIs become business mission criticals, right?
Right.
For example, if Stripe breaks their API, I would stop receiving revenue because no one is going to check out, right? So generally, like a better practice that we recommend all consumers is to write contract tests, right?
Right. What?
Contract tests on APIs. So I'll tell you what a contract test is, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so let's say there is one particular API endpoint, and you are only using 3 properties from that particular API endpoint, right? Rest all the properties you don't care about, right? So what you would generally do, you write like a contract on those 3 endpoints that hey, I am using these 3 endpoints from your API response, and now what I want is that these 3 properties should always exist in this particular endpoint. If they don't, it will break my business logic.
But this could vary from customer to customer, right?
This could vary from customer to customer. Yes. So that's why this contract test has to be written not on the producer side or the API publisher side, but the contract test has to be written on the consumer side. So this is like a very interesting practice that we follow at Postman. For example, if I'm using some other team's API, right, I still want them to be agile and I still want them to improve upon their product or upon their feature. But I also want to make sure when they are doing that, they are not breaking the use cases that I'm using them for or I'm their APIs for. So
So if
generally, what
I have hundreds of customers, so do I keep a list of all the contracts test for all the hundreds of customers? Because
you don't have to. That's what I'm saying. You don't have to. Your customers have to. For example, let's say if I am you are, let's say Stripe, I am your customer, right? What I would do is I would write a contract test on your API, right? And what you would say is that hey, you would not like out of the blue release like a new version, right? If you're releasing like a major change, you would say that hey, we are releasing this new change, and you would announce it. You would give like a beta version for that API, which like generally all API publishers do, right? And at that instance, what I would do is I would change my endpoint, and rather than your production endpoint, I would use your beta endpoint and just run my contract test and see if my contract is passing over your new APIs. If it is, yeah, go ahead. I have no like objections to you making these changes. But if it doesn't, then I would inform you that hey, your these new changes are breaking these particular use cases that I had, right? So I'll tell you why this comes very often enough, right? For example, what I have seen generally is people like API publishers generally not document everything that they're exposing of an API because they assume that people would not use those things, right? So they only document the important aspects of the API response generally. right? Now, what this leads to is certain times when you're not documenting everything, you're assuming that people will not use what is not documented, right? But that's not the case. People would use anything that is being exposed to them, and you would not be even aware of that, right?
No, no,
So
but if something is not documented in the schema, how would they know what parameters are there for that API? So
correct. So generally, what people
documentation is the only way to let your end user know, right? The entire scope of your API.
that's what I'm saying, right, Ravi? So, for example, you would want that, okay, these are the 5 important features, and I want my consumers to use these 5 features only. But right, but in certain cases, you would see that there is like some meta information that is also provided as part of like endpoint, like underscore ID,
Got
right?
it.
Or maybe a hit like a certain meta information, which from users' perspective doesn't play a role, right? Because they should not be caring about that, and that's why you think that okay, let's not overcomplicate our documentation. Just
Got it.
document the thing that matters to our users the most. But
But
users
why
won't
was
do
it
it.
created in the first place if it is not being used by if it was not supposed to be used by the end user? Why was it created in the first place?
Got it. And that's I think the problem, like with like not many people understand, right? This is probably a side effect of like a poor API design. When you think like everything that is stored in my DB that should be exposed to my end users,
Hmm.
right? That's why I think it becomes important. So if you see like certain organizations who are not in those API first wagon, they would do this. They would just make like a get query. They would get all the columns from the database, put it in a response structure, and send it to you. But the product manager understands the pain point of document like of exposing those 50 different things. So they
Got it.
say my users don't need these 50 different things. They need only
There is no
10
business
things.
value there,
There's no
maybe.
business
Yeah.
value there. Yeah, right.
Got it.
So, but like I said, like consumers, they generally don't treat documentation as source of truth. What they generally do is they send a request, they try to see like a response, because that's how integrations happen, right? What they would do is like try out those API in Postman, and they would see, hey, I'm getting these 5 different extra properties as well, and maybe I
I
could solve
see.
my use case.
So they see the JSON file and they see what all you're receiving, and they test by themselves, and they become curious and try to go beyond the documentation.
Yeah, because no, because it's not said that you can't use what is not documented. It says
Got
this is what is documented, but it doesn't say anywhere that you can't use what is not documented. And these are like from all the learnings that I have seen over like my past 5 years at Postman, like talking to customers, understanding their pain points. This is like common pain points that we see in like all these organizations who are trying to move from this code first to the API first
Right.
world. These are the challenges that they come up with, that hey, we had this API and people started using things that we were not even documented. How do we make sure that doesn't happen when we move towards API first, right? And that's why we recommend like you come up with schema, you write test against that schema, that your response only has things that you have exposed as part of schema and nothing more, nothing less. So you write tests at every instances. They're like very interesting. I would not go into the details of those aspects, Ravi, because it's going to take like another tangential, I would say. But this is what like API first try to solve.
How can we dig deeper into these concepts on maintenance and the topics that you are talking about? Is this like we just Google, or are there resources where people can read up, or how is it?
Up, we actually do like a very good job at Postman to try to share these learnings. So we have these webinars that we do every week to try to share these concepts. We also have like heavily documented blog posts on Medium, on our own blogs, that describe these patterns, describe the use cases, and talk about these better practices that you could do if you're doing this transition from code first to API first.
Got
Maybe I
it.
could link it to you after this call, and maybe you
Yeah,
could
so
share that
I
with
will add
all
it
the
to the
listeners.
description in the YouTube below, YouTube
Yeah.
description, once you send me the link. So let's close the loop on this orchestration and communication to your customers about the versions, about how they should transition, about the contract test. Um, so as I mentioned, I could have 100 customers. How do you communicate with each of these 100 customers, because they can, each of them can come back to you saying that, you know what, it broke for me, or this new endpoint that you have introduced, it's actually not helpful, and then how do you give them, as you say, a deprecation strategy, right? So you have to give them a timeline, say, you know what, we
Yep.
will support the old version for 6 months, So then there is version control. How do you orchestrate this and then individual needs of your individual customers if you are dealing with hundreds of customers? So does
Absolutely.
Postman offer this orchestration facility, or how's it work in real time?
Absolutely. So, like I said, Ravi, like when we talked about these customers, right? Like we understood all these pain points, right? For example, producers and consumers were very far away before like Postman, right? They would have to use some other channels, emails, reach out to them through their customer reps and try to just communicate that, hey, we are doing this change, can you make sure that it's good on your end? And they would have to communicate back, so the tail of communication was too long, right? And Postman identified this challenge, right? So at Postman, what we are working towards is called API network, and it's currently only for like public users, but we would have plans to extend it to like other sorts of use cases as well. So what a public API network is, as an API publisher, you could publish your APIs on public API network, right? And what it allows you to do is allows you to share your APIs with the world out there, everyone. And from consumers' perspective, it gives them like a place where they could communicate that feedback back to those API publishers, right? So let's say you have an API, you publish that API on public API network, right? Now, what I can do as a consumer, I can go to that collection that you have created, the API that you have published onto Postman, and within one click, I can start using that API, right? It's that simple. I don't have to maybe install, use curl, or get that API somehow into my system. I can just there and then start using that API there,
So
right?
that is nice. So I don't have to create a sandbox or something of that sort.
Correct,
Okay,
right? You would have to maybe provide like a way to get authentication endpoints, right?
right.
But anyways, like you would have like a place where that all the APIs are documented, and you can side by side read the documentation and try out that API, right? So we are reducing the number of tools that you would require to achieve an outcome with an API. Now the second part is providing the feedback back to the publisher. Let's say you were releasing like a new version of your API, right?
Right.
So Postman offers you change management as well. You can
Right.
say that I have created this new version of this API, but it's not live yet. It's in, let's say, review phase or beta phase, right? And you
So
can make your
usually, if Postman did not exist, the de facto or the status quo is you send an email to all your customers saying that, hey, could you test it out and give us feedback? This is how it would otherwise work in an email or some other
absolutely.
broken fashion. So what you are saying is the entire communication with your customer moves to this platform. How do your customers be notified about this?
So you can watch on APIs that you are interested in. And if
Uh,
anything changes in that API, will send you like an email and in-app notification on your Postman platform that, hey, this particular API has changed, or there is like a new version that was released for this thing. So if you want, you can go and review the changes that has happened. And we also send you like a summary of changes that the publisher has published, right? So rather than a pull-based information, there is like more push-based information. Like with every change and with every version release, that you're being made aware that, hey, this is changing, this has happened, and does it impact me or not? So, and we are working towards just tying it up in an automation way. For example, every time like a new API version is published, maybe you could run the contract test in an automated way, right? So you don't have to look and be concerned about every time a new version is released, right? Because we talked about like the contract tests are important to make sure that whatever your use cases are not breaking with the new versions of the API, right? So Postman is trying to just build an end-to-end solution of all your problems. So one thing that I talk about products, like integrated experiences are a lot of times underplayed. Not many people realize the value that an integrated experience could provide you. Once you understand and see all those things working together, right, then you realize the true power of what an integrated experience to provide. For example, today as well, right, there are a lot of products that exist out there which solves different stages of an API lifecycle. That there are products to design an API, there are products to monitor an API, there are products to do this change management as well, right? But obviously it would be a pain, like we started our conversation in the beginning, right? Like people would have to use 10 to 12 different softwares or applications just to solve their end-to-end API lifecycle or manage, like govern their API, right? But
right.
with Postman, it just all happens in one product and in a seamless manner. And because we have all that integrated in one particular place,
Right.
There are ways in which we could expand the product in future to make all those things very seamless and very easy as well. We can come up with ideas where we could understand your problems as a user and build workflows on top of it. Plus we also offer integration. So let's say even in there are scenarios where your jobs are not being solved within Postman, there are integrations towards several other products out there which you could use to achieve those use cases. For example, we do integration with New Relic, Bitbucket, GitHub, trying to gap those bridges between code and APIs.
Lovely. No, this is very powerful, and it is the value proposition is great because this orchestration, communication with customers, maintaining versions is such a big pain point because I don't think beyond a point it becomes out of hand. Okay, so there's no way you can do it all by yourself. There are no internal mechanisms, so if somebody like a Postman can solve this painlessly, so that even the communication with customers can get out of our hand, and then we can let Postman communicate, like as you said, the customers can watch each of these endpoints, and the moment there is a new beta version available, somehow they get notified either through Postman, or the notification might also go to them through email, and then they know when it is relevant, when to act, and stuff
Yep.
like that. Is a massive value add. So so is this feature out already, or is it being worked out, or where is it?
So we have released, I think, like a part of this feature, like you can create different versions of those APIs. Like you can tag based on whether it's in developing phase, whether it's in beta phase, right? You can do all this change management. You can watch APIs. There
Right.
are certain gaps in the communication part, which is I think we are releasing in like next upcoming releases.
So you also mentioned that you should have the empathy to help your customers migrate to a new API. What did you mean when with that? How can we make it effective?
Got it. Got it. I think generally what not a lot of companies like do this like because I assume like whoever works in this API world, right? They are generally very empathic towards users. For example, I'll give you like where this becomes like a pain point, right? For example, if your API is being used with a mobile application, right? It's very tough to make sure that all mobile apps gets updated within like a given time frame, right? So you can't give like, hey, you have 1 month to upgrade your APIs to our newer APIs because in 1 month your newer version of the mobiles would not propagate among all your users, right?
Right.
So that's why you would have to come up with like some sort of a strategy that hey, we give you like probably like an year where you would have to start migrating towards our new SDK or
Right.
new APIs, which would give users ample amount of time to build their own strategy because now as a result of you deprecating your APIs, your consumers of your API would have to think about the ways to deprecate their product line as well, or the versions of their product line as well. So in that sense, I think it becomes like a shared job that you help your customers out in these approaches as well. Like discuss with them what are the pain points if you ask them to migrate, work with them, work with certain strategies out, and that's why like be like more empathic in general towards users,
Right.
your consumers, and understand like it's okay that if you're deprecating, but it also leads to like a chain effect on your consumers as well.
Right. So as part of being a product manager for Postman, I'm sure you must be interacting with a lot of API product managers, right? So that's where you get feedback. That's why you test your product out and iterate and build solutions for them. So what do you think? How do API product managers plan their roadmap? How do you do that? What's a good strategy to come up with an API roadmap as a API product manager? You mentioned also. I want to touch upon. You mentioned that they should be architects because they should have this overall vision of. So first of all, at what point of time should an organization look for an API product manager? Because like for example, in my organization I don't have an API product manager. it's
Correct.
it's it's the engineers, the leads who manage it all by themselves. At what stage you think of hiring a API product manager, and then how does an API product manager manage his roadmap?
Got it. Got it. Uh, All right. So, Ravi, like how I think about it, right? Like if you are in like an API first organization, right? APIs are your products, right? So you would have to like think about APIs as you would think about any other feature or product roadmap, right? Which is like you understand which users would be using what users would be using your APIs, what are their personas, what are the jobs that they would want to achieve through these APIs, right? You start with all those basic questions like you would start for like any particular product thing, right? And if it's like a B2B API, then obviously you would have to do like a customer reach out, try to understand what they want out of these particular features. What are the because a B2B API has like maybe certain type like a different use cases, right? For example, an API by like Zerodha or by Facebook would have different use cases as API by let's say Stripe, right? So I think there's like a slight difference in terms of B2C and B2B APIs in terms of the objective. But yeah, the idea is that you still think about the similar, like the process is still like quite similar to how you think about products, which is you start with like a specification, you think for whom this API is being designed, what are the jobs this API would do, right? And you just outline, okay, this is what I want out of my API as an outcome, right? And then you would involve if you have architects or if you have engineers, right? What I would assume you would still have some sort of like an API guideline if you are exposing public APIs. Then you work with your engineers and architects and figure out, okay, what this change would look like. Is it going to be like a new API version that we would need to release for this particular feature or change that we're doing? Or is it like a way we could support on top of our existing APIs in a compatible manner? Right? So these are, I would say, like some of the things that an API product manager has to think about. Another aspect is API monetization. For example, if you're launching like a new feature, you would have to think how you would want to monetize that particular feature. Is it going to be like subscription-based model, usage-based model, right? So I think those are all the things that a product manager or API product manager would have to think about. Now, there's another part that you asked was like, okay, at what point does a company would need like an API product manager, right? So I think Ravi, it depends from organizations to organizations, right? If let's say you are like a very API centric organization from the beginning, right? Then you would build APIs as in culture of your organization itself, right? Like we talked about Amazon, like in 2002, they made sure that APIs become a culture of how they work, right? That everything that you do, it has to be in terms of API. You will only communicate within terms of APIs. In that sense, you don't need like a dedicated API product manager because it becomes responsibility of every product manager to expose the right APIs from their system. Right? They work with their engineering managers, their engineering counterparts to understand, okay, what is the API that we're going to release. From a product manager's perspective, what you would want to do is understand what jobs and use cases this API would have to solve, right? Now, for organizations who don't have this thing, right, they would still need a person to orchestrate this API change, right? They need someone to orchestrate and manage and have an overlook. Okay, what are the different kind of APIs that my organization have? How could we unify them into one single exposable unit, which can then be offered to like public users out there? And I think when you're starting thinking about those strategies, then you would probably need like a API product manager. So I think like some of the organizations that I have talked to, they when they were doing this transition, they needed like they needed like an API product manager who could understand their current API usages, could understand, okay, what APIs are useful for our users, what are the APIs that will create like an additional channel of acquisition, and these are the strategies that the API product manager would have to come up with.
Got it. Excellent. This was wonderful. So given that you are the champion of APIs, Postman is leading from the front. It is in fact shaping the entire industry on how API should be used, right? So you are at the forefront. So from that vantage point, what do you see the future of APIs looking like, say, in the next 3, 5, 10 years? Where do you see this is all heading towards?
Got it. Got it. Yeah, probably like one of the most interesting questions, Ravi. All right. So how I think about like when you think about API, right, you would always have to think from the perspective of the consumers. Like who would be the consumers of those APIs, right? So how I am seeing, or we are seeing this transition happening, right? We are seeing that the world is moving from APIs being utilized only by developers to APIs being used by builders. Now, what I mean by builders, right? Like, you, all you need to do is like you need to have an like idea. Like, this is the thing that I want out of a product, right? For example, like a very easy use case I'll give you. Like, for example, what I want in life is that find top tweets on Twitter with one particular, let's say, hashtag, and send me like a weekly email, or send my users or my people who have subscribed to my email a weekly email about top tweets from Twitter, right? Now, for this, you don't need to be a developer today. All you need is access to Twitter API. You need access to SendGrid API, and all you could do is fetch tweets from the Twitter API, put them in SendGrid in a content, and just send it out. And you could achieve all those things within just by using APIs as Lego blocks, right? So what I would assume, like in next coming years, we'll see like more and more builders coming up who would be leveraging APIs a lot for their own personal use cases, or to build their uh, own products, right? We are also seeing like a lot of change in personas who are using these APIs. So earlier we used to see like only front-end developers, back-end developers, and maybe to a certain extent product managers using APIs. But now we are seeing with like these API first organizations, like you have salespeople, customer reps, and even designers who are interested in how their API is shaping, right? Because when you're designing a UI, you would want to understand, okay, this is the information that is exposed from the API that that our team has designed, and what is the useful information that we could portray on top of on our UI, right? So we are seeing like more and more stakeholders getting involved with uh, with the APIs, and that's why I feel like things like rise of no code and low code apps, that would also increase like a lot of utilization of API as we go forward, right? And as we see like more and more users start to relying on these APIs, we would probably see like rise in terms of new API protocols and specifications, right? For example, GraphQL, right? If you understand like why GraphQL into picture, was that Facebook wanted like a very efficient manner to transform data from backend to front-end applications and to mobile applications, and they wanted to do an optimized way. They didn't want to send all the information that is required and probably use just like 1 or 2 bits of that information, because for example, if you have like a very large payload and you're just trying to use like a particular information from that payload on your UI, you're anyways calling such an expensive API. GraphQL helps you in trimming that down and only asking for what is required to view that particular page, right? And that's how like GraphQL came into picture, because the usage of API has transformed based on how it was being utilized on the front end application. Similarly, we are seeing like a lot of async API for asynchronous communication, right? And my assumption is like when we see like these new sets of products coming out, which is like low code apps, no code apps, IoTs, APIs that offer artificial intelligence on requests, like Watson APIs, right? You would see like a new protocol or new version or new specifications of APIs coming out there. Uh, this would also lead to a new like an improvement in terms of product tooling, and what I call it as like API enablers. For example, tools that would help you in visualizing the response itself, right? For example, you receive the response and you magically get a UI on top of it, because
Let's talk about this, because this is exactly how I also see the demands from our customers. They don't need our product, they need the data, okay, and then they want to visualize it the way they want. It is customizable, it is
yep.
configurable. Don't don't tell us how we want to use the UI. We want to use the UI in the way we feel fit. So help us understand how is this world shaping up.
Got it. I think there is like a lot of like my personal interest is also towards these things, because that's from API perspective. That's how I also see that these tools would start getting a lot more traction. For example, I'm not sure if you've heard this tool called Retools, right?
No.
So this
How
is
do you
a
spell it?
tool, RE tools, like Retools, and what it allows you to do, right? It allows you to like drag and drop UI elements and connect that behind the scenes to a particular database, right? And it's all encompassed into one particular product, right? Now, if we say that APIs are being offered as like Lego blocks, right? Then what you want is some sort of like a UI on top of these Lego blocks, and then your UI could also be like a Lego block on top of it that understands that API response. So see, like here you are dragging and dropping things from the side, but creating like the UI that you want. You want a list, sure, you will get a list, right? And the response of these things can come from anywhere. They can come from any sort of API. All you need like is a transformation logic that transform your API response into the response or the format that this UI would understand. That's it. And then no one would need UI. Like you can just have like an API's returning response, you transform it, and you convert it into like whatever UI you want. You want charts, you want tables, feel free to do that. Postman also has, interestingly, a Postman visualization in which you get API response, and you could write your own transformation on that response and build your own UI. We had customers who have built charts for their APIs, who have like for, I think there was one shippable. Uh, wait, I think I'm getting the name wrong. So there was like an organization who was in uh, this courier business, right? And what they wanted to portray was their centers on like a global map, and they had an API that returned all their centers that are there out there in the world. What they did was they built like a visualization on top of it. So when you send that API, rather than saying that geolocations, you see like a map in which those are points embedded on like a global map inside Postman itself. Postman also very recently launched Postman Flow Runner, which helps you in building these automated flows within Postman itself. So you can create different types of APIs and achieve outcomes from those APIs. Like the one that I mentioned, like you fetch top tweets, transform them, and send it out as an email. You could achieve this entire workflow in Postman today. It's in beta right now, but I think we'll hit GA very soon with that particular feature as well.
This is so transformative. Huh? This is like mind shifting for me. Um, so as so help us understand how should companies who are offering APIs as products prepare for this. So should they offer like how should the conversation be with the customers? Like who is deciding whether to use retool to create this mash product, drag and drop product? So should you be consulting to these customers, asking, hey, you use retool or you use this workflows from Postman, or is this something that the customer is aware and they have the freedom to pick, and we just have to expose it APIs? How does it? Maybe you
Got
can
it.
explain the
So I think
conversation that should happen.
absolutely. So I think, Ravi, like the conversations should always be from the perspective of the user in terms of what are their needs from the business, from the product that they have, right? Not like how they're going to consume those APIs. I'm telling you, like in future, you would see tons and tons of products that would be built around APIs. So if I would say, like if we'll do the conversations around what kind of products you are using for those APIs, you would again be able be create. You would only be creating like limited set of APIs that are optimized for those certain tools, right? What we should rather do is understand the use cases that users are trying to achieve through our APIs or through our products. That hey, why you would be interested in this kind of API? What would you use this API for? Let's say if we give you this, right? And in that sense, you would try to understand users' mindset and perspective better, and you would design and build an API which is far more better than you would do otherwise, right? And once you do that, and it's an API that is well thought through, well designed, easily extensible, then your users would have entire flexibility to use whatever tool that they want, whether it's Postman, whether it's Retool, or any other product that comes up in future. So, like I said, like if you even if you're like a product manager, always have the conversations like you would have if you're building like a new product itself. Like who are the users? What would they want? What are the use cases that this product should solve? API should also form or should also have like similar conversations. So if you think APIs are going to be the products of future, and we should have those conversations in the same way.
And what would be the market for the opinionated UX point solutions that we might already be having? Like, should we kill them off, or is there a market for smaller customers who might not have these integration capabilities? Or do you see the future that even smaller customers are not going to use it because the the barrier to entry is coming low with no code tools? Even the smaller customers, even an individual customer with a single person business, will also be able to use such no code tools to consume your APIs.
Yeah, I would see we would. I believe we would see like a down trend towards like UI based products. Like for example, in the past 10 years, like if you would see if you're following the funding news, the organizations are able to generate valuations and funds just based on the API that they're offering. APIs around security, Snake, you might have heard, and you have Played, you have Twilio. All these were able to generate revenue just based on that. Hey, we have this API, we are solving a business problem, and we are solving a business problem in like a very easy fashion, right? So you would obviously see like a downtrend because if let's say as an organization you are able to solve the similar use case that you were able to solve with the UI, you would rather spend more time in building APIs rather than UI. That's what my understanding is, right? Obviously, it's still going to be like a long in distant future, but that's what it's going to be. And I think this will also be supported with an advancement in no code tools, where it would become like so simple for people to consume API. I would say like in current scenario, the we see people relying on UI based tools because there is friction in how we consume those APIs. With Postman, we
Mhm.
are trying to solve it to like a certain extent because you get like a very easy UI, you get like a one click access to APIs which you could use to send, but still like visualizing it, accessing it is a little bit tough. Or authorization is another problem. Once we start gapping those things down, right, removing those friction points, you would see like it becomes so easy for people to consume the response. I'll give you like, I'm not sure if you have been following this news in India, right? Like the Coven API, right? So they like the Coven portal for vaccination. I'll give you like a very interesting case study that happened in Postman, right? So Coven came up with an API from the day one, right? So it was like a very thoughtful decision from their perspective. And within 1 week, we saw tons and tons of APIs who were offering you ways in which you can get notified when a vaccination slot is available in certain hospitals. You
Got
could
it.
set you could set monitors on top of it to understand, okay, how is the vaccination trend going on when we have reached certain limit, just so that you could get comfortable in going out there in the public, right? So just imagine like Covin was a platform to make book slots, but people developed workflows on top of it and just automated their entire workflow. As
Because
soon as
it just, yeah, because it actually unlocks creativity, right? It
absolutely,
unlocks potential, it unlocks, because the scenarios are different, and it actually helps spread the value of that API, and it is such a growth lever. Okay,
absolutely,
otherwise, if you don't open these APIs, you never know how the community would react. In fact, it is good that you have a strategy for it. You never know where your next growth will come from. So
absolutely.
such a big aha moment for me as well. So excellent. Well, this brings us to an end of a fascinating conversation, Prashant. It just got better and better as we were conversing, and I actually am ending this conversation on a high because most of the aha moment was in the last 10 minutes of conversation that we had on the future of APIs. And I know for sure that there are many product managers who have not realized this change. They're still thinking about point solutions. They're still thinking about UI, UX based products. But if you want to unlock growth, and the your growth lever is API, and thanks for realizing that. So, Prashant, why don't you? So, if listeners are listening to this and they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so feel free to reach out to me on both of those platforms. I love talking to people. I love interacting with people, learning from their experiences. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter.
And if I want to consume content from Postman, is this best to go to your blogs or YouTube channel, or what would be a preferred way? Your webinars and stuff like that.
I think webinars are more for people who are onboarding onto Postman. So if you want to go like a lot deeper, I would recommend please check out our blogs. Those have like very well detailed information. If you are generally interested in like APIs and API ecosystem, we
Right.
have blogs by Kin Lane, who is like known API, uh, you can say pundit in this API world.
Right.
So yeah, we have like lots of content around that.
Also, since you mentioned about these Lego blocks and how the future is shaping with no code and stuff like that, just a feedback from you. If you could write a brilliant blog post on this as part of Postman, I'm sure this is
Sure.
going to be highly valuable. Maybe you can pass it down to your product marketing or whoever is responsible for
Absolutely,
this.
absolutely.
This will be really, really helpful. Cool, Prashant. Thank you again. I can't thank you enough for your time. This was high value content. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ravi. Thanks for having me.